Good evening, everyone. I am Madhu Sridhar, President of the League of Women Voters of the San Antonio area. On behalf of the League, I welcome you this evening to this important and timely forum, Informed Voters, Fair Judges. I want to extend a warm welcome to Judge Norma Gonzales and Ms. Jane Bockus. For the record, I want to remind everyone that the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization. The League does not support or oppose any political party or any candidate. The League encourages informed and active participation of citizens, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. Before I hand over the program to Diane Endy, our Vice President for Program and Action, there is one important person that I want to thank, and that is Lamont Jefferson. He reached out to me for this forum and was instrumental in making this happen. So thank you, Lamont. And Diane, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madhu. Good evening, everyone. We are so pleased that you chose to join us. Based on your responses to the two registration questions, we have a well-informed group of participants. We will ask that you use the chat function periodically during the presentation to get a sense of your thinking around additional questions. You will find the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Many of your questions will be answered by the presenters tonight. Some may be addressed through a set of resources that we will email to you in the days following the event. As Madhu said, please keep in mind that the League is nonpartisan, nonprofit, all volunteer, and our intent is to keep this presentation nonpartisan as well. And now let me introduce our speakers. Norma Gonzales is judge of the 131st District Court. First elected in 2016 and re-elected in 2020, her current term ends in December of 2024. Judge Gonzales earned her BA in History and Psychology from Rice University. She earned her JD from the University of Texas School of Law and was licensed to practice law in 1984. Judge Gonzales has over 30 years of legal experience, including 15 years as a family law attorney. She taught for 20 years as an adjunct professor at St. Mary's School of Law and formerly served Bexar County as assistant district attorney on the City Council Municipal Court Advisory Committee. Jane Bockus has over 40 years of experience as a trial lawyer, and she also served as a secondary teacher in San Antonio. She earned her BA in history from Southern Methodist University and her JD from St. Mary's University School of Law. I wanted to share with you that after the mass shooting at the church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, Ms. Bockus volunteered to help families and victims with legal issues. She is a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers and a board member of various professional and civic organizations. We are so fortunate to have two such highly experienced legal experts with us tonight. Ms. Bockus, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Diane. It is a privilege to be here, and I was honored to be asked to do this by Mr. Jefferson, who's been previously referenced. This program was put together in collaboration of two organizations, one that I belong to, the American College of Trial Lawyers, and one that Judge Gonzales belongs to, the National Association of Women Judges. And the program was originally designed to be presented on Constitutional Law Day, Constitution Day, which is September 17th. But we felt that this was a very relevant time to present this program, as early voting has already begun in the state of Texas for the upcoming election. And as a result, decisions are being made about our judges right now. And so could we have the next slide, please? And so today we're going to talk about a number of issues that are related to how judges are selected, and the role of judges within our Constitution. As this slide indicates, we believe that informed voters will lead to fair judges. Could we have the next slide, please? This is just indicating that this is a program that was put together by these two organizations. If I could have the next slide. So here are our objectives today. To examine the unique role of the judicial branch in our Constitution, distinguishing the role of judges from the roles of other governmental officials, to evaluate the significance of the judicial branch and the need for fair and impartial courts, and to explore challenges facing the courts. If we could have the next slide. So this is very interesting. The Annenberg Constitution Day Civic Survey is conducted every other year. And as recently as 2018, the number of people who could answer the question correctly, name all three branches of the government, was only 26%. And as y'all can see, now the number is up to 51%. Of people polled who could identify the three branches of the United States government. And the thinking of the Public Policy Center that conducted the survey is the reason the number has increased so dramatically is because of the news that has dominated the airways for the last 4 years that involved issues of impeachment hearings, of political leaders who have turned to the courts to decide who won an election. The role of the courts has become so much more prominent in the news in the last 4 or 5 years that the number went in 2019, only 39% could identify the three branches of the government. In 2017, only 26% could. And as you can see now, over half the people surveyed could identify the three branches of the government. Could we go to the next slide? And so some of the topics that we are going to be covering, including that question, come from the test that people have to take to become citizens of the United States. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the Constitution. Judge Gonzales, what is the supreme law of the land?
Well, the supreme law of the land is obviously the Constitution, we the people. And I wanted to add just a personal touch to this. My mother, who came to the United States from Mexico when she married my dad when she was 20 years old. Fast forward at the age, she was a resident alien, 65, that's 20 years ago. She took this very test to become a citizen. And she has a flag proving it. She's just so proud of that. But it is the Constitution, and that's where the source of the questions are.
Let's go to the next slide.
So what does the Constitution do? Well, it sets up the government, it defines the government, and it protects the basic rights of Americans. What does that mean, really? When it says protects the basic rights of Americans, it basically limits the power of government. Otherwise, government wouldn't have any guidelines, but we do, and they come from the Constitution. What is the rule of law? Everyone must follow the law. Nobody is beneath the law. I think that's some of the argument that's going on in Washington right now, as Jane said a few minutes ago. All leaders must obey the law. Government must obey the law. No one is above the law. And so when there's a question about that, they go to the Supreme Court to see whether or not they should be abiding by this particular law or whether there's an exemption for them. Name one branch of government, branch or part of government. Well, I think when you think of Washington, D.C. and you look at the buildings, I think that's helpful because there's basically three branches. There's a legislative branch, the executive branch, which of course includes the president and starts with the president of the United States. And then there's the courts and the judiciary. And the three are basically checks and balances so that not one of the branches dominates our lives as citizens of the United States. What is a constitution? Similar to a rule book for government, outlines the outlines the structure and function of the government, limits the powers of the government, lists some of our rights, and reflects the principles and values by which we live by.
And so for y'all watching today, the program in PowerPoint was designed to be presented to a live audience. And there are many points along the way when we want to ask for participation from you all. And obviously we can't because of the constraints of a Zoom presentation. And so as a result, Norma and I, or Judge Gonzales and I, will be answering questions ourselves, where typically we would be asking you all to answer these questions. So as you can see, a constitution is similar to a rule book for the government. And it limits the powers of the government. It lists the rights of both the people who run the government and the people who are governed. And it reflects the principles and values. Could we go to the next slide, please? So this is something that I think deserves a little bit of time. And Judge Gonzales, I ask you to chime in at any point, because I think there's some general confusion in the public regarding the difference between a federal court and a state court. And part of that starts with the Constitution and the supremacy of the law. And so at the base level are local ordinances, and then state statutes, state constitutions, federal statutes and acts, and then the United States Constitution. So local ordinances have to do with, chaining up your dog or riding your bike on a sidewalk. State statutes govern all aspects of state law. And federal statutes go into laws that are derived from the Constitution or are made by the United States Congress versus our state legislature. And all of those, at the end of the day, have to comply with the United States Constitution. And so you hear all the time about people challenging the constitutionality of a state law or even a local ordinance. And at the end of the day, those questions can end up in front of the United States Supreme Court if they are brought properly. Could we go to the next slide, please? Do you have anything to add to that, Judge?
No, and a lot of times, like you said, there is some confusion, especially if somebody's representing themselves, they're a pro se. They'll come to the state court and start talking about the violations of their constitutional rights. And we have to tell them they're in the wrong venue because those issues really belong in the federal court.
And that kind of goes to this point on jurisdiction, parallel court systems. And so we do have parallel court systems. Judge Gonzales is in the district court in Bexar County. She is part of the state court system. And so just for reference, from the district court is a trial court. Then there's an intermediate appellate court, which is the Fourth Court of Appeals for San Antonio. And then the next level of appeal in the state court is the Texas Supreme Court, or the Texas, what do they call the criminal one? The Court of Criminal Appeals. And so in our state, at the highest level, they have divided criminal cases from civil cases. And as you might have guessed from my question just now, I don't handle criminal cases. So I don't necessarily keep up with it so well. And then on the other side is the federal courts, and they address federal law questions. There is an exception in cases where the plaintiff is from one state and the defendant is from another state, and that's called diversity. And in those cases, the cases can be removed to federal court if they are filed in state court. But most of the cases in federal court involve constitutional law questions, civil rights issues, and federal law questions. Interestingly, over 90% of all cases filed are handled on the state court level, not on the federal court level.
Now, obviously, the judicial system is different, whereas, and you may hear oftentimes the appointment of justices for the federal court system, and including, of course, the United States Supreme Court, whereas on the state level, there's a different system in Texas, and we'll talk more about it later. We have the election of our state judges. There are no lifetime appointments in the state system.
Yes, and so I appreciate that this is kind of at a 10,000-foot level, but when you think about the United States Constitution and federal laws, they are laws that impact every citizen of the country the same. State court laws are laws that only pertain to the citizens of that state. And there are dramatic differences from state to state in their state court, their state constitutions and in their state court laws. But the federal law applies the same over all of the states. So let's go on to number 15, if we could. So this is I'm sorry, the one before, I missed, yeah, the preamble. This is the beginning of our Constitution, the preamble, which is like the introduction to a book. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. What's interesting about this for both Judge Gonzales and myself is that when written, we, the people, really referred only to white male landowners. So we were not included in we the people when the Constitution was originally written. As some of y'all may know, all male citizens, regardless of race, were given the right to vote by the 15th Amendment in 1870. Women did not get the right to vote for another 50 years until 1920. Native Americans were not entitled to vote until 1924, when they were first recognized as US citizens. Then, as some of y'all may remember, at the 26th Amendment, which was passed in 1971 during the war in Vietnam, lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. Because young men were being drafted at the age of 18, and the decision was made they should be able to vote as well. So the parts of the Constitution are like chapter or parts of a book. So the preamble is the introduction, then the 7 articles are the 7 chapters, and then we have 27 amendments. The first, well, I can't say that yet because we're going to have a little question here. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So the articles in the Constitution are like separate, very extensive chapters. The first one establishes the legislative branch, the second, the executive branch, the third, judicial branch. The fourth has to do with state rights, the fifth, amending the Constitution, the Supremacy Clause, and then ratification. So as I mentioned earlier, there have been 27 amendments to the Constitution. So this is the first time I'm going to ask y'all a question. Who can name one of the rights granted in the First Amendment? And if you'll put your answers in the chat, that would be great. And Mac, if we could go to the next slide, please.
Okay, we're waiting for people to respond in the chat. Go one more slide, please, Mac. The first question, actually, Jane, was what is the Bill of Rights?
Okay.
Is that okay? Or do you want to go to the next one?
I'm going to go on to the next one because the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution.
Okay. Mac, next slide then, so people can see what we're asking.
Yeah. So one of the rights in the First Amendment. So I've seen some come up.
Yeah, I've got freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right to bear arms, freedom of the press, freedom of religion.
So some of y'all are doing better than others.
Quite a few. Freedom of speech and freedom of religion are up. Quite a few of those.
Yeah, and that ding, ding, ding. that is correct.
Freedom of assembly.
Very
freedom
good.
of assembly just came up.
Yes, that is correct. The right to bear arms is the Second Amendment. I can't even pretend to put every right in the amendment that granted it, but in the First Amendment is the freedom of speech, freedom of press, the freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, and the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. So good job, everyone.
Distinguishing the judicial branch. Really, the judicial branch, I think, is the one that is most distinguishable because I think the executive and legislative branches sort of commingle. There's a lot of parallels in there. There's a lot of similarities. The distinguishing the judicial branch is wholeheartedly different. And one of the most interesting things about it is that the judicial branch cannot be political. Whereas obviously the executive branch is very political. It's the president. The legislative branch obviously is very political. They can shout out at the top of the pulpit what they believe in and what they want to do and what they support. And the judicial branch cannot. We cannot express an opinion. You may ask some questions in the chat later on. Well, do you believe in the right to bear arms? Do you believe in the right to, all sorts of things? And I cannot comment on that because I must be unbiased and fair to both sides. And so that's, I think, the biggest difference between the judicial branch and the other two branches that we have. So what does the judicial branch do? Well, we review the laws. We have all sorts of laws on the books, everything from municipal courts where we have tickets and the law and statutes and ordinances that say you can only travel at 55 miles an hour or 80 miles an hour. We also explain the laws. Sometimes there's two sides, two attorneys come in. It could be Jane and I on two different sides where we're looking at the same exact law. She thinks it means one thing and I argues for it. I think it means another thing and I argue as attorneys. And then the judge explains the law and interprets the law in that particular instance. And then we go to the third one, which is resolve disputes. That's where you're going to have your dispute. Many times it's reading the very same case, one case that has already been decided, but it's interpreted in two different ways by two different lawyers or two different sides. So that's what we do. So we decide, we resolve disputes. And then more so in the federal judiciary, they decide if the law goes against the Constitution. Again, that applies more to the feds, as we call them, and not to the state.
And there's going to be more discussion on down the line, but what makes a good judge is one who will follow the law regardless of their own personal beliefs. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit, but go ahead, Judge.
All right, so resolve disputes through a legal process. Cases must be brought to the courts. The judicial branch does not proactively seek cases. Obviously, attorneys may seek cases. to an extent. There's some limits on that also. But we sit there and we wait for the cases to come to us. Juries may also be involved in criminal and civil trials. We have in my opinion, the biggest and best system of juries in the United States that is unparalleled in the world. There's a couple of other countries that have some semblance of a jury trial, but nothing like what we have in the United States. When you think about it, even on the lowest level, on a speeding ticket, you can demand a jury by your peers. And that's just unheard of in many countries, where somebody can be what's that saying, Jane? The judge, an executioner, all at the same time. Here we have different levels. We have different levels of appeals in case the first judge, the trial judge, it could be my court, misinterprets it. You can go up to the next level, and that higher level make a decision, grade our papers basically to decide whether that's right or not right. The jurors are the ones that, as we explain to the juries when we get them in our courtrooms, is I am the judge on the law, but you are the judges of the fact. Interestingly enough, if you've served on jury duty, you will see that anytime the jury enters the courtroom, we rise, just like everybody rises when the judge enters, because they are judges. They are judges of the fact. And so we give them the same deference as the attorneys do to the judges themselves. On the criminal side, there's different burdens. It's a higher burden on the criminal side beyond a reasonable doubt. On the civil side, there's several different burdens, but for the most part, it's a preponderance of the evidence, a much lighter. And you can imagine why, right? A lot of times on the criminal side, that means incarceration or even death in some states. So the burden is higher of those that that have to prove their case. But this is something it's difficult for juries to do, whether it's deciding a criminal case or a family law case, where they're trying to terminate the rights to a parent of a child, or trying to decide that they live primarily with mom here in San Antonio versus living with dad up in Wisconsin or Seattle. That's a separation. And so a lot of times those decisions are very difficult for the juries to decide.
Judge Gonzales's point is 100% correct. It's only in the United States can someone who has virtually no means whatsoever in terms of money come into court and seek justice against a giant corporation, or against their neighbor or whatever. The system allows for anyone to seek redress in the courts if they have a legitimate claim. Can we go to the next slide, please?
How is the judicial branch different from the other branches of government? Well, as I already alluded to, one of them is we must remain apolitical and unbiased. We make decisions based on past law. It's called precedent. And on the facts before us, either us or the jury, but many times those issues come to the court directly. The judicial branch was created to insulate or protect from pressures that exist on other branches. Again, you can have some lobbyists in the legislature trying to lobby a certain law be passed. That can be of no concern to us. Once it comes before a judge, we put on our blinders. As Jane said earlier, I cannot be, even if I have a personal like or dislike for something, and I'm going to take something as simple as a speeding ticket. You know, maybe I hate that particular street is 55 miles per hour, and I don't want to follow the law. But if that is the law and a case is brought before me and it's proven, then I must side on behalf of the law enforcement that cited this particular individual, regardless of my likes or dislikes.
Let's go to the next slide, please.
The legislative and executive branches may be influenced by public opinion, and they are. They're politicians, right? You can hear you hear the commercials going on right now for different races that are being run. On the judicial races, they'll talk about their qualifications, or maybe talk about the other judges or the other candidates' non-qualifications. Whereas you get the congressional candidates, the ones for the executive branch, they're talking, that's what they talk about. That's what they focus on. And they're getting supported by a lot of money. by those that they're supporting, by what they're pushing to them. So that's a huge difference between the legislative and executive branches and what they can do with the special interest groups and lobby money and personal opinions that we as judges cannot. There's a limit on the money that judicial branch that judges can receive. There are different levels in different states here in Texas, and I guess all over the United States. And there's only a certain amount of money, whereas again, for some of the other branches, the executive and legislation, there are no limitations a lot of times, or most times, for what folks can give them, contribute. And you get, I'm sure you get them now on your cell phone and on your email, raising money, and they'll sometimes ask for $5, and then there's the $100,000 plate. We can't do that. It's limited. There's a lot of reporting to the Texas Ethics Commission for us about the monies that come in, who gave it. There's a limit on that, so there's a lot of reporting that has to because we have to remain impartial. If Jane comes into my court and she's giving me money, I can't say, well, I've got Joe on the other side, but Jane's giving me money, so I'm going to decide for her regardless. We can't do that, and you as the public have to trust us that we won't. That we will abide by the law, we will look at the facts, and we will make decisions unbiased or unprejudiced by contributions or by impact of other individuals that are coming before you.
And I would add to, I'm seeing a comment, but I would add to what Judge Gonzales just said, in that not all states, and we're going to get to this more in a little bit, not all states elect judges. And all of our federal judges all over the entire country are appointed, and it's a lifetime appointment. And the thinking behind that policy was that they would be above the riffraff or the debates going on in the public, and they would just focus on their job, which is to interpret the law. Some states have appointed state court judges as well, but in Texas, we do not. We have elected judges. So in order to address the need for an impartial judiciary, there are limits on the amount that people can donate to judges running. But, I don't think I'm talking out of school if I would say, unfortunately, judges still have to go out and raise money to run for re-election, which is difficult. Okay.
Right, and you raise money from those very attorneys that come before you. But they can be scrutinized by your the opposing candidate, by anyone really, to look and see. It's just I guess inherently we've got to you just got to do the right thing, and obviously we hear or read about the cases where it's not done, where a judge has taken kickbacks or bribery and made decisions a certain way, and I always think, it's going to catch up to them. I don't see so many things they can get away with it. If I even thought about it, I think I'd, be caught. But some people do it, and you hear about it, you read about it, people go to prison that are lawyers and judges, and it's unfathomable that happens in my brain, but it does, unfortunately. So
how should judges make decisions?
Well, just by the very case that comes before them, as my old law partners used to say, whether you're white, black, purple, or polka dot, it shouldn't make a difference. When you come before me and with me in my practice, especially being on the bench now, I know a lot of the attorneys that come before me. I've known them for many, many years. And so I'll sit there and talk with them, both sides, visit with them about old stories or catch up with them. And then as soon as I start the case, then I've got to put that aside and listen just to both arguments, both sides, and make hopefully the right determination based on what's before me. And then afterwards, you can still, greet them and say, and go visit with them, go have a cup of coffee. But it's got to be what comes before you, and you've got to put those blinders on. I had a good friend who one time years ago was running for judge, and he was telling a friend of his, I'm going to run for this particular position, and he tells that attorney, said, and I'm going to be fair, and he tells my friend, well, I don't want you to be fair, I want you to side for me all the time, and they laughed about it, because it's obviously, that's not what happens. You have to follow the law, and I can tell you that the legal community in San Antonio and Bexar County, even though there's large numbers, it's really small. And if I think if a judge were to do that, certainly more than once, I think if people talk, people will know, and then that's just not a good reputation to have.
Could we go to the next slide, please? So how do we keep judges accountable?
Well, it talks about us taking an oath of office, but we know that many times you're in a jury trial and they take let's say a family law jury trial, and everybody swears right to tell the truth. And then you hear one story that says the world is flat and the other one that says the world is round. So that doesn't in and of itself, make people accountable. We have to show a basis for our decision. By that, I think that sort of goes in with the appellate process. If I make a decision, then they have every right to take it up to the appellate courts, the fourth court here in Bexar County, for them to grade my paper and see if I followed the law and if it made a difference in the outcome. And that's why we have all the justices up in the fourth court. That's what they do. There's a code of conduct, because not only do we have to be scholarly in reading the law and following that, but we also have to be the face of the court. The code of conduct, I hear so many times, what about their demeanor? What about this or that judge's demeanor? How are they when they sit on the bench? Because really remember that this court belongs to the people. It's not my court. It belongs to the attorneys that come before me. It belongs to the parties they represent, especially. It belongs to the jurors that are in there. And if I sit in there, or any judge sits in there and does not have the appropriate demeanor with everyone, that can be a huge problem. And sometimes, we've had all over Texas, certainly in Bexar County, there have been occasions where someone can be a very good judge on the books, knowing the law, but perhaps their demeanor lacks a lot. And there are grievances that can be filed, and there's disciplinary action, and they're serious. What they do here for judges is, I may get assigned randomly from Austin a case of a judge or an attorney that did something inappropriate and from another county. And so we sit on those because it's not somebody, we're not going to be judging somebody within our own community. We hear cases from another legal community. So there are methods, and I think they're effective. I'm not sure people always know that they can do that, but it certainly can be done.
So Norma, a question popped up. Is there a way that the public can research whether a judge has been disciplined?
I believe there is. I'm sure there is. I've never looked it up myself.
Me neither.
But I think what they do is there are some that are private reprimands, and I think it will show private reprimand. I think there's others where you will read about them usually in the paper because you can't check. So certainly if it's something that's significant, I believe with the, up in Austin, they would have some kind of reserve to show that you can look it up.
Yeah, I think that's the case. So let's go to the next slide, please. So courts and politics, incompatible values. And so here I would like for y'all to wake up and help us identify 3 positive labels to describe judicial decisions. If you just put it in the chat.
In other words, how might people describe a judge following their decision if their feelings were positive? What are some of the ways you might describe a judge? Okay, we've got learned, equitable, fair, made clarifications, fair again.
Yeah, I apologize for the question not being clear, but in your own mind, what are ways that you would characterize a good judge? What are terms you would use to characterize a good judge? And this is great. Impartial, fair.
Wise. I like that one.
Yes.
Thoughtful. Listens.
These are great.
That's
I hope
really
you're writing
important.
all these down, Judge Gonzales.
I should be.
That I can assure y'all she is all of those things.
Reasoned is another one. Okay.
So let's go to the next slide if we could, please.
Okay, what are some negative labels that could be used to describe some judicial opinions? Negative labels. I've got pompous, sleazy, dismissive, political, biased, knee-jerk, fraudulent. Some very creative words here.
Yes. So let's go to our next slide. And I saw a question pop up previously about, it seems that when the Supreme Court justices don't like a law, they just change it. The Supreme Court does not have the ability to change a law. They have the ability to determine whether it's constitutional or not constitutional. And then it goes back to the legislature to address whatever issue the Supreme Court found in it. So things that are generally considered good characteristics are fair and impartial versus activist judges. And we've all heard this term a lot in the last few years during Supreme Court nomination, the process. Norma's story previously is funny and true. I mean, every lawyer, that we don't want a fair judge, we want one that's in our favor. And that's kind of what's been happening on a higher level in terms of political issues becoming front and center in the judicial selection process, rather than the judge's academic and judicial experience. Rather, where do they stand on certain issues? And we've all seen in the confirmation process where people will try to pin a judge down on how they feel about certain issues that may come before them. And a judge should not comment on these things, because you can't in a vacuum comment on how you might rule on a question that's not before you. Because facts matter, everything, there are just so many variables that go into every case. But we're all looking for fair, ethical, nonpartisan, unbiased judges who are professional, who treat both the lawyers and the parties who are in front of them with civility. And the judges who are activists, who are legislating from the bench, who either identify themselves and their rulings as liberal or conservative. These are all things that we don't look for in a judge. So can we go to the next?
And if I might add something sort of in those same realm, Jane, a lot of times I know folks like y'all that are interested in different candidates will go to a forum but we'll ask the candidates or the judges, well, what do you think about this? Or how would you lean on this one? And get upset when judges or judicial candidates say, I can't make a comment. I can't tell you how I feel about that. And it's frustrating for you because you really feel like, you should be able to know and ask that. And again, you can ask them all day long of our representatives for Congress, for, state legislative and executive branches. But as judges, we cannot, if a judge or judicial candidate does give you an opinion, that's inappropriate.
So these are things that when you are looking into judicial candidates that are good questions to ask. What is this person's legal and judicial experience? This is not always easy to find. And for many years, the San Antonio Bar Association did judicial polls. They have quit doing that, which is unfortunate because it was the local lawyers responding to polls about judicial candidates for the Bexar County benches. And as a trial attorney, I knew who all the judges were, and I knew what their legal and judicial experience was before I went to the voting booth. But the people on the street who are not, even lawyers who don't do trial work, don't necessarily know or understand the qualifications of judges. And so, for example, Judge Gonzales, before she took the bench, was a trial lawyer. And so she had appeared in court representing parties for over 30 years before she became a judge. And as a result, I knew that she was going to be a really good judge because she understood the judicial system, what the role of the judge should be, and truly the basics of how to run a trial in a courtroom. And unfortunately, too many times we end up with judges who have never tried a case, who have never handled a matter in a courtroom. And so they just don't have the experience that a trial lawyer and that the citizens of Bexar County should want to see in judges before whom they're going to be bringing their cases. The educational background, I'm not certain how important it is where someone graduated law school or what number they were in their class, but in order to run for anything over JP, you have to have a law license. Obviously, character, ethics, temperament. The best advice I can give any of you all is to contact your friends and neighbors who are trial lawyers and ask them about who these types of characteristics in the judicial candidates.
And even other folks at the courthouse. I mean, the courthouse has a lot of knowledge, not just the attorneys that are showing up, but staff members and folks that work with the judges all the time. If you know them, you can ask them, because they've been there, they go into our courtrooms, they deal with us on a daily basis or weekly basis. And so reaching out, I know there's a lot of folks in town that will compile lists and will ask around and then try to spread that list around after doing some pretty good homework from that. The Express News always has their endorsement. And I know when in the past, when I've gone to those, they've studied up on the background. They ask you some tough questions. They know the courthouse, or they go around the courthouse or call their contacts at the courthouse and ask about the candidates or the judges. So those are helpful. And, because otherwise they may look good. We may look good on our legal experience or educational background, but it's hard to find out. And that's the problem with the election, or that's an issue with the election of judges. But we'll talk more about whether or not, appointment is any better. So.
Yeah. So let's go on to the next slide. Obviously judges have to make difficult decisions in accordance with the law. And they are often not popular.
I always say when I'm in a hearing, I'm going to be popular with 50%, because I'm going to inevitably rule for one side and not the other. And the truth is, most attorneys know when they come where that the answer lies somewhere in between. But yes, you can't just make a decision because it'll make people happy. A lot of times, unfortunately, you have to make those tough decisions.
And so this is what so often boils down to is that at the end of the day, it's the courts who protect the minority rights in spite of majority rule that may not necessarily be consistent with the judge's decision based on the law. That may not have made sense, but let's go on to the next slide.
Well, we talked about this. The judicial branch was not designed to be political or representative branch for the very reasons we've been talking to you all about today, how different this branch is from the other two. And there's a reason, it's a checks and balances, right? If something happens on the executive or the legislative side, they have to come to the courts and to make sure that everybody stays in bounds, regardless of who's paying money to do what.
So if we were all together, I would be asking you, and in the chat, please feel free to give the answer to this question on what you think might happen if judges decided cases based solely on public opinion, special interests, or political influences.
Chaos. Okay.
That is correct.
Perfect.
That is 100% correct. Yep. Those in power would always win. No, this is exactly right, regardless of the merits. And that's just not the way our judicial system works, fortunately. Good answer, Mr. Jefferson. And to the first response on chaos, I mean, one of the things that we all need to have an ability to rely on is what is the law and what does it mean? And I think that's why there's been so much kind of frustration over some of the decisions that the Supreme Court seems to be changing their position on some laws that it does lead to a certain sense of chaos because the whole idea is the law is what it is. And there is a concept, stare decisis, which means judges rely on prior cases to make their rulings on current cases. And without the rule of law, it would be chaotic. The wealthy would rule the world, and justice would not even be available. And fortunately, despite all the flaws in our system, I think that justice usually prevails.
We have a couple of others. Money would decide, follow the money, and the loudest might be heard.
Let's go to the next slide, please. This is a quote from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts. Judges are not politicians. And it may seem hard to believe this, but they are not and should not be. So let's go to the next slide, if we could, please. This is a short video. Let's go back. Yeah, play the video if you would.
Judges play an important role in our legal system. They decide issues that touch every aspect of our lives. Yet when voting for state court judges, millions of people leave the ballot blank. Polls show voters lack information to make decisions about judicial candidates. We want to change that. States have different methods of choosing judges, detailed in state laws and constitutions. But no matter how your state selects judges, there are some things you should know. Judges are not politicians, even when they come to the bench by way of the ballot. The public expects judges will decide cases based on the facts and the law and not be swayed by public opinion special interest groups, or political influences. More than 90% of legal problems are handled in our state courts. Nearly 30,000 state court judges hear almost 100 million criminal and civil cases each year. In many states, people vote for judges in either partisan or nonpartisan contested elections. In other states, judges are appointed. Some states also have a separate judicial nominating commission to review applicants who apply to serve as a judge. The commission generally recommends the most qualified candidates to the governor for appointment. This merit selection process can be used for trial and appellate court judges. After the appointment, most judges or justices still appear on the ballot after a specific time. This process, known as merit retention, provides the public with the opportunity to vote yes or no to keep or remove an individual judge. Judges and judicial candidates must follow a code of conduct. They should not make promises about how they would rule in cases before the court. Judges can also be disciplined or removed from the bench for ethical violations. Additionally, judicial decisions can usually be appealed to a higher court. Many resources are available to help you learn about the judges and judicial candidates who may appear on the ballot. Bar associations often post bios on their websites. Judicial forums to meet judges and judicial candidates are often held locally. You can also watch appellate court proceedings on court websites in many states. Additional nonpartisan educational resources can be found at the National Association of Women Judges Informed Voters Fair Judges website. Judges make important decisions every day that may directly affect your life, your family, and your property. So learn more about the judicial branch and the judges on the ballot in your state. Don't leave the ballot blank. Your vote is important to ensure fair and impartial courts. This message is provided by the National Association of Women Judges Informed Voters Fair Judges Project. For more information, go to www.ivp.nawj.org.
Thank you. So let's, if you'll go to the next slide, please. The little video talked about the ways that state court judges are selected. If we can go to the next slide. Norma, I'll let you take it from here.
So there's different ways they're either appointed and or elected. There's some, as you heard, about the retention method, which is once they're on the bench, then they will the public can vote as to whether or not they're retained to continue on that bench. Here in Texas, we have elections. There's always been talk that it comes up in the legislative sessions about reform for that and to go to an appointment process. And I know that the questions that were sent, I think ahead of time, at the very top of the huge amount of questions were about, election versus appointment. But there's huge issues with an appointment process also, because who's going to give the information or get the information? They always talk about forming a nonpartisan group or a bipartisan group of folks, of attorneys, of the public citizens. But who gets appointed on those will also be important. And I just think that has so much more potential to get certain individuals appointed over others. It's when you look at the judiciary now, it's folks getting out there trying to run. And yes, we don't, the public does not have the information on everyone, but to limit the selection of the judges that are going to hear your cases day in and day out, your divorces, your ticket cases, your custody battles, your personal injury. If we go to an appointment process, then you're going to have a very small group of people that are deciding who are those judges that are sitting on the benches. And I don't know about you, Jane, I just feel that leaves a lot more open to bias and prejudice and picking a certain type of judges than it does to trying to just educate the public more than we have by appointment.
When we were preparing for this, one thing that I had not appreciated previously was that there are only 6 states in the country that have partisan election for judges. And this is, and you'll see that the most common way judges are selected are through nonpartisan elections. So judges don't declare as a Republican or a Democrat. And that is something that has come before our legislature time and again as a possible solution to some of the problems that we've seen. And the whoever is winning is against it, and whoever is losing is for it. And that has been true during my entire 40 years of the practice of law. When I started practicing law in the late 70s, all of the judges in Bexar County were Democrats. There wasn't even that. Typically, there wasn't a Republican on the ballot. The election was decided in the primary, and then there was a huge push for judicial reform, and things changed dramatically, and the pendulum swung, and all of the judges were Democrats. And over time, the pendulum has swung back and forth, and there was a period where it seemed that in every presidential year, the pendulum would swing in favor of the Democrats running for judge, and on the gubernatorial year, it would swing for the Republicans. And as a result, every other year, we would lose really, really good, experienced judges, and we would get some really inexperienced judges. And so the one change in our laws that has occurred in an attempt to address the problem is that there's no longer straight ticket voting. You can't walk in and pull a lever and vote straight Democrat or straight Republican. And I don't know that that's Judge Gonzales would have a better idea as to whether that's making any difference down ballot, or if people just don't go down ballot. They just don't vote.
And you can see them on the numbers more so now. When you get done by the numbers, I mean, maybe for governor or for president, you have so many of the citizens in Bexar County voting. By the time you get to the bottom of the ballot, several pages down, there's a drop-off number, and it's pretty huge for the judges. And I agree. Thank you for bringing up the partisan versus nonpartisan. So we have, when we show up on the ballot, we're either a D or an R. And so I think part of the reform that I think a lot of people would be for is for nonpartisan elections. We don't have to declare. It's just, Jane and Norma running for the same bench without us having to say or having to pick and say, well, we're a Democrat or we're a Republican. I think that could be helpful. But they talk about it every 2 years, and Jane's right. If whoever's in charge in the legislative branch, then they want they want to do it or they don't want to do it, and it goes back and forth. So,
okay, let's go to the next slide. So this is something that is going on at all times, where the legislature is attempting to limit the role or independence of courts. And they do this in a variety of different ways. If we can go to the next slide. You want to talk about that, Norma?
Interfering with judicial decision making, gerrymandering, creating new courts. So what they do is I think you've seen the puzzles that appear on our newspapers when they change the boundaries of certain sections of our county, of our state. And then that changes, everybody knows the dynamics of who lives where, how many Republicans live in this area, how many Democrats, what area is Democratic heavy, what area is Republican heavy, in order to make a difference on how many, who gets a representative out of that particular area. And it just goes, up and down the line.
I don't know that which of these are even being contemplated in Texas, but I don't think allowing firearms in the courthouse is one of them. If it is, I'm unaware. So
yeah, I mean, these are sort of hard to address because I'm not sure. I haven't heard, for example, judge shopping for partisan advantage. We really limit that, and I don't think there is the possibility of a judge shopping for partisan advantage so much, at least in Texas. Limiting enforcement of rulings. Have you heard of that, Jane? Here, and I have not either.
no.
Changing judicial selection or term lengths. They did address, I think, and made a higher standard for minimum educational and experience for judges running for certain types of benches, where it's gone from 5 years to 10 years, and for some from 10 years to 12 or 15 years. Those will come into play in, I think, 2024. I have not heard about term lengths. Here it's 4 years. For us, we see the congressional the congressmen and women who have the representatives that have 2-year terms, and those are tough. I can't imagine as a judge having to run every 2 years, because you never stop having to be out there and politicking. Every 4 years, it's and then like Jane says, when the pendulum swings, all of a sudden a lot of those judges are out and the new ones are back in, and by the time they get their feet wet, then the pendulum will swing again, and we'll see what happens this go around.
Yeah. Could we go to the next slide, please? So interestingly, years ago, Justice O'Connor was expressing her concern about the state of judiciary in America. And her concern was that the manner in which politically motivated interest groups are attempting to interfere with justice. And I think we still see that. We see that today. I mean, but it's not new today. This has been going on for time eternal. I think we're much more aware of it today because it's more front and center in the news. So what can you do? That's kind of why you all are here, right? Be informed about the system, people, institutions, use your voice, vote. Don't leave the ballot blank for the state court judges. Please don't do that. The positions are too important. State court judges impact all of our lives. And it's so critical that we have an educated population voting for these positions.
I mean, just think about what goes through the state courts. On the one hand, it's the criminal courts. I mean, everything again from misdemeanors, but the felony cases, and you've got to be informable what judge has the experience to sit on those type of criminal cases for some very serious issues that need to be addressed. And do you have someone there who, when you do your research, has never tried a criminal case, has never been in criminal court? That can happen. That has happened. On the civil side, we are asked to terminate the relationship between a parent and a child, make custody decisions between parents, business disputes, huge business disputes involving a lot of land and money, personal injury cases. So, you've got to, and I've got to say that the League of Women Voters, I know in the past, for years has put out a pamphlet in a newspaper that tries to have a piece on every single candidate that's running. Now, the candidates have to be proactive. They have to respond to the League of Women Voters and answer those questions and put down what their experience is. I saw one on the chat that said that you get all sorts of flyers from the judicial candidates and they don't really say anything. And that's true. I mean, I think it's important. I wish maybe there should be some regulations that should require us to say, how many years have you practiced? What areas have you practiced in on the bench that you're seeking? What kind of law does that entail, to see if you've been practicing criminal, what are you doing running for a civil court? Maybe that's a thought. I don't think that'll ever happen, but that's the way you find out. I think it's important for everybody to put candidates to put down what they bring to this bench, and unfortunately, a lot of them they don't.
So that brings us to the end of our PowerPoint. At the very end of it, there are some resources that I believe Diane is going to make available to you all in terms of possible websites where you can go to find out more about judicial candidates, about the system, that sort of thing. But I've really enjoyed the discussion today. I've learned a lot from Judge Gonzales, as I always do.
Oh, Jane, I encourage folks, especially for those of you that are here, you're obviously interested, you want to be knowledgeable in what you're doing, contact their campaign. We have our emails, usually our phone numbers, contact them and say on an email, I want to know what your background is. I want to know how many years you've practiced. I want to know the type of court that you're vying for. If it's a criminal county court, it handles DWIs. Have you handled DWIs before? Be proactive. That's the best way to do it. That way you'll learn and become knowledgeable when you get your ballot and early vote.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, we are coming to our conclusion here. Thank you, Judge Gonzales and Ms. Bockus, for your generous and helpful guidance tonight. I've learned a lot myself.
Thank you.
Participants, thank you.
Uh-oh.
Diane, you've frozen.
Zoom. Pluses and minuses.
We will follow up this webinar with 2 emails. One is a very brief survey, just 3 questions to get your input on this and possible future webinars. And another email will list informed voter, fair judges resources you may find useful as you prepare to vote for our judiciary. And we will try to answer some of those questions that we couldn't completely answer here tonight. We also encourage that you make use of our printed voter guides that Judge Gonzales alluded to. They are currently distributed to public libraries and other community locations around the city. And you can also access vote411.org. That's VOTE411.org online or on your phone to learn about various offices and get the candidates' responses to serious questions relating to their office in their own words. We don't edit. Unfortunately, as Jane alluded to, not all candidates do respond, although we give them many opportunities. However, many do respond. So you may find that the ones you're curious about or interested in have exactly what you need to know on vote411.org. Thank you again, participants. Thank you again, Judge Gonzales and Ms. Bockus. Madhu, did you want to say anything else?
Oh, no, I was going to talk about the voters guide and vote 411, but you covered it. So that's absolutely fabulous. And once again, I'll thank Lamont Jefferson. I'm glad you have joined us. And thank you so much for helping us organize this. So thank you all for coming. And as Diane said, the recorded version will be uploaded on our website and YouTube channel for those who missed it. And thank you, Judge Gonzales, and thank you, Ms. Bockus. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Stay well.